What are the ripple effects of caregiving that touch every corner of our lives, not just for those directly involved, but for everyone around them? In today's episodes, we talk about the layers of caregiving's impact, a journey of empathy, strength, and resilience that changes the caregivers, the cared for, and everyone who supports them. Joining us is Todd Keitz, the founder of My Care Friends, a platform born from Todd's own caregiving journey that began at the age of 9 and evolved through the decades of supporting his loved ones through life-altering health battles. His story, alongside the experiences of Katie Seymour, her husband Todd, and myself and my mom Jill, sheds light on the nuanced, deeply personal realities of caregiving. Todd's vision for My Care Friends was inspired by the profound need for connection and understanding among caregivers who are often shoulder this immense responsibility alone. The mission is clear: create a supportive, safe community for caregivers and patient advocates to connect, educate, and advocate together. Today we talk all about caregiving. We talk about how it is rarely a solo effort. It often requires an entire network of people and resources. And we unpack what that ripple effect of caregiving is, from personal identity shifts to relationship dynamics. What is a caregiver, and how can we recognize this role to bring essential support and validation? You're going to hear us share all of our thoughts and how self-forgiveness and setting boundary play a role in our journey. Here is my interview with My Care Friends.
Hey everyone, I'm Todd Keitz, founder and CEO of My Care Friends, and I'm really excited to be here today in a collaborative effort between My Care Friends and willGather. And Nicole Will of willGather, she'll introduce herself shortly. But right now, I kind of want to go through a summary of why we're here. So today's program is really important, and we have special guests today who are going to share with us, along with significant others in their lives, why they're here. The program today is called The Ripple Effects of Caregiving. And it is a really important topic because caregiving affects so many things in our lives as caregivers, and also the people who are being cared for, but also the significant others in our lives as caregivers. So, there's the financial, physical, and emotional demands that come along with caregiving for a loved one, and it often exceeds what a single caregiver can handle. In fact, multiple people generally contribute time, energy, and money toward caregiving for a family member or a friend, as the impact of the long-term care is felt across the lives of many, not just one. The opportunity to plan for the likelihood of needing care before a crisis situation occurs remains at large. It's a challenging one, and I know that, having been just kind of stepping into a situation, and here I am 6 years later. The reality it is that the challenges of aging can affect many people, and the effect of that person on that person's spouse, siblings, children, grandchildren, friends, neighbors, coworkers, employers, in ways we just don't even think of. This podcast, we're going to share some of the struggles that caregivers face daily in a conversation with Nicole Will, founder and CEO of willGather, Nicole's mom, Jill, Katie Seymour, director of community engagement for My Care Friends, and her husband, Todd. And for a little distinction today, we're going to try and go call me TJ, since Todd and I are both Todd. We don't want to confuse everybody. So
Right.
we'll do our best, so hang with us. So I'm going to pass this over to everybody else so that there can be introductions. And why don't we start with Nicole?
Yes, thank you, Todd. That was a wonderful introduction. I think it's so important to have context of why are we talking about this? Why is it important? For me, it's really bringing my two worlds together, not only as a caregiver, but as a family member, and then working with older adults. So when I was 15, my grandma moved into our family home, and we cared for her until her passing. Primarily, my mother cared for her. And she was one of my closest friends. We walked through life with her, and I didn't understand what the word caregiver would mean to me. and how it would really impact my work. And at the same time of discovering my love of older adults, I went to college, got a degree in social gerontology, began my career working in senior living, and then really decided to have a bigger voice and impact as I was talking with families, working with older adults, and decided to found willGather. And we are dedicated to enhancing the well-being of our older adults, really equipping them with information, providing family caregivers with resource. And we do that primarily through our podcast. We also have a gift shop named Gigi Betty Co., named after my grandma, which supports family caregivers and brings awareness to them. And with the podcast, it's really this way that we can empower families so that they have information. It's amplifying all of the good work that's happening in the care economy, how we can support with information from experts and caregivers and CEOs and educators and people that kind of wrap around our families and older adults to give them support and make them feel seen and empowered. And we cover a wide range of topics, anywhere from age tech, health and wellness, caregiving resources, dementia, legal, financial, right? All the things that Todd, you were saying, it really impacts all of our lives. So we know we're making an impact, and the podcast is growing and we reach a lot of people. So super happy to be here.
Super happy you're here. Super happy we're all here together. I think for continuity purposes, why don't we go to Jill next, since we have the mother-daughter component there. So Jill, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm Jill. I'm Nicole's mom, proud mom of Nicole. And yeah, she kind of said how she got started, but yeah, my mom came to live with us in I figured it out, 1994. She lived with us for 15 years. She was 68 when she came, and she lived with us for 15 years. And then the last 4 years of her life, she lived in a long-term care center and died about in 2013, so 11 years ago. Grateful that during that time, Nicole actually worked at the facility where my mom ended up. And that was tremendous comfort to me. So that's kind of when it all started. She was on her own for about 7 years, and my husband, she lived in Illinois. My husband actually brought it up that maybe we should consider relocating her, knowing she would be growing older and didn't want her on her own. So that's kind of how it all started.
Thanks for sharing that. So let's have Katie jump in. Katie?
Great. Thanks, TJ. As you currently mentioned earlier, I serve as the Director of Community Engagement for My Care Friends. My other role, which I have to mention, is also working with TJ in the healthcare tech industry with his other company, 17 Commerce, which I'm really proud of. I formally have a background in education, higher education, curriculum and instruction, and mental health. Prior to that, I guess this is kind of where my first taste to caregiving started, really. Was when my grandfather lived with us. He too moved from the Midwest, St. Louis, to Denver. My mom moved him out, and he lived with us for, I want to say, 5 years. I graduated school, moved back home to save money, and in that interim time, I sort of fell in love with the elderly populator group as well, and went back and got my my master's degree in health administration. And also went back to school and did some clinical work and received a CNA, because I really wanted to understand kind of his experiences, what he was going with Alzheimer's and dementia, and support my mom. And again, like you, Nicole, I don't think I really understood. In my mind, I was like, oh, I'll go back to school and I'll learn and I'll support and I'll help. I'm looking back today is really where I'm understanding the impact of what that experience, I guess, did for me in a positive way, and to where I am today working in the industry that I'm in. I also have a kind of more unconventional, if you will, experience with caregiving. My father in 2021 was a tricky year. 2020 was a really tricky year, but I would argue in our family it was even trickier in 2021. In April, my dad actually suffered a pretty traumatic heart attack, was hospitalized in and out of the hospital with procedures, surgeries, and so on. And my first taste of kind of understanding the patient advocate piece was really learning to advocate for my dad on behalf of my dad next to my mother with all of his medical providers, because I think that there was a misunderstanding as to where his baseline was. And it was a lot of back and forth. And I was lucky enough to have a lot of good friends who are in the medical industry kind of navigating and helping me, really coaching me and asking the right questions. That following July, my sister was in a terrible accident in Telluride, Colorado, was flight lifted to Grand Junction to save her life, essentially. It was a rural area in Colorado. Suffered a severe TBI. She moved back to Denver at that time and lived with my mom and dad. Was in a inpatient care facility, I think, for 2 weeks. Then moved in with my folks, my 7-year-old ish parents. Ish, I say ish. Mom and dad, don't be mad if you watch this. I was here for several months. Moved back to Telluride to really start her life with this traumatic brain injury. And we look at it now as the silent injury. And her illness continued. And I don't think we realized as a family unit how difficult it was and how severe her injury was. So again, looking back, I noted the back and forth conversations we had, supporting her, I guess, as a caregiver from a distance. And unfortunately, she did pass this past year, 2023, due to seizure. So I think, this is a nice lead into my partner, Todd, who kind of was part of that.
Todd?
Yeah. So I'm Todd, Katie's husband of almost 11 years.
12.
12, geez. But together for going on, 18. So, yeah, I think, along with what Katie had said, by her side, I think, through that, that whole process of really years, like you said, Katie, 2021 was a tricky year. 2020, obviously trickier. And I'm in hospitality, so our industry got pretty shut down. But kind of when all of this, with Katie's, sister and father, it was still kind of COVID-y times, but, opening back up. And then I had several months of, just not really working, not really terribly busy. But then when it opened back up, we started to get really, really busy again. So kind of with all of that going on, I was, going back to work, more and more full time. And in addition, we have two young daughters. Now they're 10 and 5. But then, 2 years ago, 8 and 3. So, little kids. So that kind of, added another element of at least, our home life.
Thanks for sharing that. So from afar, I've learned a lot about Katie and Todd, and I admire the way that they communicate, the way that they co-parent, the way that they just communicate overall. And we're looking forward to hearing about, Nicole and Jill. And I guess I should share a little bit about my background and why I'm sitting here in this. So in my caregiving journey, one could say, started when I was 10 years old. My uncle lived with us for a year, and he had a surgery, Crohn's disease, and had a colostomy bag. And so I was helping with all of that on a daily basis. And then fast forward to my grandparents later in their life. But most recently, and certainly most extensively by far, was in 2018. I was living in Oakland, California, and having video calls with my parents, and my mom didn't look well. I said, let me come and let's take you to some appointments. Well, it's 6 years later, and I'm still here because at that moment, within 3 weeks, her health crashed, and it was the first hospitalization of 17 and 22 months at that point. And then 3 months after her 17th hospitalization, 2 weeks into COVID, my dad was diagnosed with bladder cancer. And then it was rounds of chemo and radiation and so forth. Fast forward, they're both relatively stable now. They have their ongoing issues. But as you can imagine, during that experience, there was a lot related to what we're going to be talking about today. So that's a perfect segue to let's jump in. So I think the the first thing is to understand why we're talking about this ripple effect. And I'm gonna pass the first part over to Nicole, who's going to share and define, what a caregiver is.
Yeah, I know. With this term, I feel like is we're using it more and more, but I know back when I was 15 and when my mom was caregiving, we didn't have the words to put to what are we doing, right? We're mom, we're daughter, we're friend, we're sister. And so I think looking at, well, what is a family caregiver? And it really refers to anyone that provides unpaid care, support for a loved one. It could be a family member, a neighbor, a friend. It can be full-time, right? As we had people live with us, part-time, long distance, as needed periodically. I think a lot of times families don't often self-identify as a caregiver, which I love that this conversation is happening more and more because it allows us to seek help and support and know what to look for. Caregiving is a massive, massive part of our society. There are 53 million unpaid family caregivers. They are contributing to the health system in such a huge way. Unfortunately, we found the health system really isn't designed to support the caregiver. We're hoping that that changes. When we know that 90% of the care happens in the home, family members are responsible for so many critical tasks, insight into our loved one's life and well-being. I was looking at some of the numbers, and in 2021, the estimated economic value of family caregivers' unpaid contributions was approximately $600 billion, which is just mind-blowing, based on that about 38 million caregivers are providing an average of 18 to 24 hours of care a week. So when we look at how this immense contribution of families are supporting, right, the healthcare system and the economy at large, it's often at a significant personal cost. There's so much that impacts our work life. There are, when you look at that number of hours of care a week, 61% of those caregivers are female, 39% are male. The average age is in the 40s. We're looking at between 24%. So if we combine 24% with 23%, 24% of 18 to 34-year-olds are caregivers. 23% of caregivers are ages 35 to 49. This is affecting generations much younger, and we can see that it is becoming such an important conversation that we need to have of how are we supporting people. Like you had mentioned, you had young kids, right? We're not only younger and younger in our caregiving, but we're juggling our families as we're starting our careers. I had a conversation with a younger caregiver a little bit ago, and we talked about how it's really that life interrupted. Everything that you thought was going to happen maybe doesn't. I think it's important to look at how caregiving affects our health. A lot of caregivers, about 36%, experience high levels of emotional stress, poor relationships. It affects our health in various ways. We know with the data that oftentimes the caregiver's health suffers almost more than the person they're caring for at times. And 61% of caregivers are working while caregiving. So they're making accommodations, they're reducing their work hours, they're declining promotions. The data with that working daughter talks about how it's an estimated lifetime loss of $324,000 in earnings and Social Security benefits due to the caregiving responsibilities. It's impacting us in so many ways, which I think just highlights why we need support, encouragement, relief, resources, information, respite, and all of those things when we look at what's really happening at the data.
Yeah, thanks for pointing all of that out. It's so important. And your point early on about it's not just an older person issue, but that's kind of what people always thought. You thought of a caregiver, you thought, and And it still bears truth to a great extent. It is that population. You have 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every day, and you have a shrinking number of caregivers. So something's got to come to a head. And then when you add in all the statistics you were just pointing out with younger generations and the sandwich generation who have kids that they're caring for and parents they're caring for, it's immense. And one could say also the numbers that I know you found, and they're published numbers, I sometimes think that's not even large enough. That's not even getting the full scope of what the issue is.
Right. Yeah. So many people, I think, are caring in silence. And, you know, a lot of people, especially in the workplace, they're not wanting to maybe highlight or talk about it due to the stigma, or will I be overlooked for a promotion, or is it going to affect the work that I'm given, or, you know, all of those various challenges. And I think because the cost of care is rising so much, so many more families are stepping in because we're unable to really afford long-term care for the length of time that we need it. So a lot of moving parts are bringing us to the place that we're in.
Absolutely. Let's take a look at one aspect of caregiving. We're going to look at a lot of aspects, but one aspect which really relates to Katie and her sister, and that has to do with long distance caregiving, because often people at a distance don't identify as a caregiver. But it's really important because they are. So we'd love to have Katie talk a little bit about what that was like, and then also what it was like for Todd in supporting Katie during that time, because it's often for the spouse or the loved one, they're not immersed in it like directly, but they are immersed in it because they are feeling the effects. They're there to support. Sometimes it could be really challenging because they're not on the front line, so to speak, but yet they are. So Katie, can you tell us a little bit about that situation with your
Absolutely. Sister? Yes, I'd be glad to. And it's been such a powerful, eye-opening kind of, I would say, journey for me throughout the time I was supporting my mom and grandpa to now, because what I saw at that time, and I'm not sure, Nicole, if you felt this way, that's just what you do as a daughter. So you just move, you just support your grandfather, your grandparents, and they come out, they live with you, or you take care of them, you do whatever you need to do. So when my dad was sick, in my mind, I was like, okay, this is just what I do. Of course, I love my family. But I wanted to step up, and I wanted to support, as the oldest child, I wanted to support my father and my mother, of course, during this time. So when then Jenny got sick, I was, okay, this is just what we do. I'm the one that I need to have my cell phone on 24 hours a day. And Todd, my partner, can attest to that. I'm the one who's picking up calls because she, is forgetful or switching a job or wanting to, just lean in to me. There's a lot of, if you know traumatic brain injury, there's a lot of mental health trickiness, I'll say, that goes on with that. A lot of unidentified mental health situations. So, having that background, I oftentimes was the first front line for Jenny to call. So when she went back home, home meaning her home in Telluride, it was difficult. It was really difficult. I felt this sense of, what can I do? How can I support her? I was working 60 hours in my in-home office. And as Todd mentioned, he was starting to ramp up in work, and our kids, preschool and all that. So it was difficult, but I think at the time, I don't know if I really fully acknowledged and maybe was not self-aware of what was happening. It was just kind of, you do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Todd. So Todd, during all this time, what was that like for you? I mean, you would be on the other end of it. You'd hear her on phone calls. You knew what she was dealing with. You knew what Jenny and their parents were going through. How was that for you in navigating it?
Well, it's hard for me to watch, because to a degree, I kind of just felt helpless, being there, to support, emotionally, Katie, it was, hearing Katie on the phone, constantly talking with so many different people. And it's hard to keep, hard for me to keep track of, okay, who's this, who's that, in Telluride and kind of that area where Jenny was living, roommates or friends or colleagues, just always on the phone, just trying to get what Jenny needed, what she really needs. Because I mean, like Katie said, after her TBI, she wasn't quite the same. So just kind of having Katie just really talk with so many different people, it was just kind of it's hard for me to support her as best I could because I didn't really know. I mean, this was all new to me too, and it's I feel like I'm a part of the family. So yeah, that remote or that long distance deal for Katie was, and it was it was hard to watch. Again, I kind of just felt like I couldn't do enough.
I can completely understand that. Figuring that for Katie, it was hard at a distance, feeling helpless in ways and not being able to be there. And then you watching that. And so you feeling it for yourself, but you're also feeling it for Katie at the same time, the challenges. And that's got to be real hard. I want to go over to Nicole, because the topic that you talked about, Katie, which is really important. And I'm not going to, I could talk about myself, but I'm here to moderate. So it's the topic of, I'm supposed to do this, which is a really, really important one for our audience, because I'm sure people watching this, there's something inside of them that is pulling them that way. So Nicole, how did you navigate that? And how was that for you?
Yeah, well, I think for me it was looking at that life was just happening. So one of the things that I didn't mention earlier is that when my grandma moved in with us, we actually moved houses. So we sold the family home that I was born and raised in to accommodate having a home that had a little space for my grandma. And so I remember saying goodbye to our family home. I think we were all in the living room. And I remember it being so sad. It was like closing one chapter of life, but exciting of starting another chapter. So I always go back to, and I'll speak to this, I'm sure throughout our time together, as two things can be true at the same time. So knowing that while there was grief and sadness at what our family looked like as a unit was also sad that was changing and we were moving, but also the possibility and being able to spend time with my grandma that had always lived far away, and the happiness that would bring, and the new house was really cool. And so I think it was looking at how to do that. And my parents were really good about bringing us together and having conversation and all the things like that. But it definitely, you navigate a lot of different emotions for sure as you make a lot of changes.
Absolutely. And Jill, as the mom watching Nicole be there, what were your feelings related to Nicole's participation in all of this?
Well, even though we might have talked about it with them, it was in the end, it was our choice, to do that. And we felt, it was the right thing to do given the circumstances. My mom was healthy when she came to live with us. So it wasn't, that she needed maybe at that point a lot of physical care. I figured it out. I was 37 when she came. And, we have 4 kids. Nicole was, I think, finishing 8th grade. We had one finishing 7th, one finishing 1st, and one finishing 3rd. And so I remember driving to the airport and all of a sudden felt completely terrified because I thought, oh my goodness, like life as we have known it for all these years is it's going to be different, and I don't know what that looks like. And so, but I just knew it would never be the same. And it just like I got so anxious driving to the airport, and but just had to trust that in the end it would. We knew it was right, and so you just, like you said earlier, Katie, you just do it. But yeah, I just realized how young I was at that time. So yeah, I would say those earlier years it was more emotional support for my mom. It was a big change, and remembering it was a big change for her too. Like the first year she lived with us, she didn't have a car. And so not only was I getting my kids to all the places they needed to be, I was getting her to all the places, that she needed to be, looking for a car, helping her, get to church, to find new friends, to all the things. And so if I kept that in mind, then it was helpful knowing that it was a change for both of us, and it was a change for our family life. It was a change for Nicole and her siblings, and just praying that it would all work out in the end.
Yeah. And there's like two phases of our caregiving journey, because the first part was, like you said, more of that emotional support. And then towards the end, when her health declined, the caregiving evolved and was more hands-on. And so it definitely, it's almost like when my mom and I talk, there's two different parts of that. There's the younger part where, God bless my mom, we're
Where I'm at
teenagers.
now.
Yeah. Yeah. We're teenagers, and she's trying to, manage and parent, and that's where getting into trouble, and then my grandma's there. So there was a lot of moving parts and a lot going on. And then, later as that evolved, and as you really need to step in for health concerns and look for care, and looking at how end of life and all of that, it does really change and shift as that journey goes on. And for some of it's shorter, and for some of it's years and years. So
Yeah, I would say the first 14 years, she was pretty good. She didn't like to be alone, for sure, in our home. And so whenever we would be, leaving to go somewhere, it was more providing, somebody, a friend or different extended family member that might be willing to come and, stay with her, while we were away. I really, had to make a conscious decision early on to really keep my marriage a priority and my parenting as much as, I could. So, all the while being sensitive to what needs she had kind of, emotionally. But after that 14th year, her last year of living with us, my aunt, her sister, who never married, was at 85, decided she was going to have a neck surgery at Mayo Clinic, and moved here with 2 suitcases.
Oh,
And my mom's relationship with her was complicated. So my mom emotionally struggled with the fact that she was going to have to share me. So that, I would say, those years were the most challenging of all. And, at that time, by then Nicole was married, starting to have a family, and my aunt was having this big surgery, and I'm driving back and forth to Mayo every day, all the while Nicole's going to have a baby a month later. So that was really, really, I'll cry if I talk about it. That was just really hard. And then, my mom couldn't drive the last year she lived with us. She was having some stenosis in her neck and left her hands numb, and she wasn't comfortable driving anymore. So there was just a lot going on. And then she herself had a surgery a year later, and was eventually left without being able to walk, and needed to move her into long-term care after a rehab thing. So those years were really,
that's when the ripple effect really started to happen.
Yeah, no
Like, yeah.
question.
I had, we had 4 grandchildren during that time. And, I tried to involve myself as much as I could. I took them with me to visit them, at the care center, just so I could, a way of being with them at the same time. And Nicole has a picture that's so cute of my mom in a wheelchair and her son in a stroller looking at a fish tank in the care center.
oh,
And I just thought, it's so true. How we start, we kind of can end. And it's a beautiful picture and a great reminder of, the importance of, and the kids brought her such joy. So I was thankful that, I could take them to see her. That helped me to feel like I was spending time with everybody.
This is all great. I'm so happy that everybody's sharing all this information. For everybody listening, it's profound. It's important to hear. It's validating for the caregiver, for the loved ones of the caregiver who are supporting them. And there's a really important topic when we look at acknowledging and the self-awareness around caregiving, and also how that can linger. I know for myself, even though we're two plus years on from the craziness of the 4 years with my parents, I still have PTSD from dealing with everything. And, that phone's ringing, or my mom's short of breath, or like, what's happening? And I go through my mind of, okay, we got to do this. I start lining up everything. So there's something real about that. But I want to ask Katie, if you can talk about that, how that has affected you. And then also on the flip side, the lucky part about being in this role.
I love that. I'm so glad you asked. As I was listening to Nicole and Jill and you as well, TJ, chatting about your experiences, I'm finding myself, we think about the acknowledgement piece, and sometimes it comes afterwards or lately afterwards. And I love what you said, Nicole, that two things can happen at the same time. You can feel multiple things. I think that's so beautiful, because I'm in this seat right now, 1 year later after my sister passed, 2 years after the accident with my dad and his injury and my sister's accident, and realizing, wow, I was able to be a part of that experience, as hard as it was. It's a season of our life right now, and it's what we were given, and it's an opportunity, to forgive ourselves, to forgive people around us, and to, as I shared in the speech of my sister's celebration of life, not move on, move forward. Mm-hmm. And somehow that gives me a sense of peace, but I also want to acknowledge that doesn't come right away. So when we think about this idea of ripple effect, I'm even thinking about my husband, Todd, and like, oh my gosh, he, what did he experience at that moment, that it's just kind of surfacing.
Yeah, there's an important piece to this, which is, as human beings, we are constantly defining and redefining ourselves. And that's without caregiving. Mm-hmm. So when you then put the caregiving and advocacy piece on top of that, it takes it to a whole nother level. And there's so many aspects of that. And then when we look at supporting loved ones who are there, I mean, Todd, being there and supporting Katie, I would imagine, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine as you're watching Katie go through this, you're thinking, my gosh, how is this affecting my life? This wasn't part of my dream. This is what a part of my vision was. Who am I? How do I redefine myself?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, looking back, it's definitely, made us stronger as a couple, and as a family. I mean, during the, when it was, during all that, it was hard to really think about, it making us stronger. But, I think Katie was really good at it, is just her and I doing our best to be on the same page. And a lot of that was, involved our kids. What do we, with Katie's dad and her sister, what do we tell our kids? It's like, they're really close with their grandparents, and they're really close with their Jenny. And they're both really smart and resilient, little girls, but they were so young, what would they understand? Mm-hmm. But we wanted to be honest with them. But it was tricky, what do we say? And Katie and I, we communicated, with each other, I think pretty well on that, being on the same page as much as we could. But I really followed Katie's lead on this. I mean, she's the best mom, so.
Wow. And I appreciate you sharing that. And it just echoes what I said at the beginning, that I admire both of you and what I've come to learn over the past year, and how you work together, how you've communicated. Neither of you are perfect. Nobody's perfect. And you do your best, and you learn and you communicate, and it can be hard at times, for sure. But the fact that you're both sitting here today, and the way that you're sitting with us, and sharing about that. And we really appreciate that. And I want to turn this over to Nicole for a moment. And Nicole, I'd love for you to share, because this is a good dovetail to, we do define and redefine ourselves, but in that process and in the process of caregiving, there's a big topic called boundaries. Mm-hmm. And how did that play out for you? And we know there's not an exact book, but can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think boundaries are so important because it tells and shows people in our lives how to interact with us, right? So if we don't do a good job of knowing what we need or knowing how we're supported and then communicating that, then our interactions, our relationships, whether it's the person that we're caring for or our family, we don't know what those expectations are. So it can get really tricky. And I would say in those moments, specifically with my mom and I witnessed her have boundaries, like she said, of prioritizing her marriage, having time with just oh my gosh, I'm going to go back to my psychology words here. Is it, nuclear family? So just the four of us, I remember my mom would protect that time and we'd have dinner sometimes of just us, and my grandma would have something else going on. And so, as the care progressed, I had to learn to say and have the courage to say what I needed, so that both my mom and I felt like our needs were being met. And I think boundaries is also a part of like defining what you need and what you don't need and protecting that time, protecting the space, protecting the relationship. And I think for ourselves, we feel more, I don't know if in control is the word, but we feel better about ourselves when we don't feel like our time or our thoughts or emotions are being taken advantage of and everyone else is managing that for us. I think it's important to keep that autonomy, and we do that with the boundaries that we have. And for everyone, it looks really different. So for what might work for one person isn't going to work for the other. So just acknowledging that.
Yeah, absolutely. Boundaries is a tough topic for everybody. Everybody has triggers from their childhood, from our nuclear family or family of origin. And that it plays out, and often many people aren't aware, and even the best of us who are aware, we can struggle in times because there's the stress factors and how that's playing in and so forth, and also because we have a sense of duty, we have a sense of responsibility when we are in a situation that we fight with ourselves, aside from having to present this information and communicate with the loved one, whether it be the one we're caring for or our significant others or our children. One quick example, the other day, I had traveled for 2 weeks nonstop, and I just business travel, got back, was slammed with tons of work, didn't have a time to breathe until I had planned to drive on Sunday afternoon, mid-afternoon. I was just going to get in the car and go to the ocean. At about 2:00, my mom says, "Can you take me for a drive by the ocean?" I'm like, oh my God, I had to wrestle with this so hard because, my heart just, I didn't want to disappoint her. I know the challenges she has every day, but I knew my self-care, I knew I needed that time, or I wasn't going to be able to be there for her the following day when we needed to get to Cleveland Clinic. So what I kept trying, I preach this a lot, and sometimes it's harder than others to keep in mind, but I led with kindness and love. And I went into her and I just said, "Mom, I would love to take you for a ride. I really need this time to myself. I really need to go for a ride." And she just gave me a hug and she said, "Don't worry about me. I understand. You do so much." And it just, so the challenge that could have been there, it went away because I was being kind and direct. So it's a big topic. We could do a whole other podcast. Maybe we will. I don't know. We'll see.
But you really highlighted that boundaries is a form of self-care. And I think in our caregiving, we need that.
Absolutely. So we'll be wrapping up shortly, and I just want to touch on a couple of other things. I'm so grateful that we've taken this time, and as we all know, we could sit here and talk for hours and hours, and we may be back. But it impacts all of our lives, in every different way. We've got a sense for that, for all this. So are there tools? So Nicole, tools that you know of and that are helpful, solutions, resources that you would say to the audience, hey, these are things that are good to check out?
Yes. Well, I think, knowing that we are caregivers, so looking for how we are supported in that. For me, I always say podcasts, right? So the podcast I have, but there's a lot of other podcasts out there that are talking about caregiving. Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver is one. Happy, Healthy Caregiver. Mine is Navigating the World with Your Aging Loved One. And it puts you in touch with not only people that have resources and tools, whether it's an app or technology or things like that, but also I think the biggest part of that is we connect to story. And when we hear other caregivers share what they're going through, it helps us feel that we're not alone. So I think, hearing the story of that, my mom and I wrestled with our relationship, right? I wanted time with her. She was busy. How did we go through that? Someone else can say, oh my gosh, I relate to that. There's some great people on social media, which looking at our younger population that are caregivers, Be Light Care, Adria Thompson has really digestible videos for families. Dementia Darling brings a lot of joy to families. Compassion and Caregiving, she's a therapist, a mental health professional that supports caregivers when you're looking for mental health support. Dr. Natalie Edmonds has a Care Blazers where it's all sorts of caregiving resources specifically for dementia caregivers. So I could go on and on and on with all of the resource, but know that it's out there. And I think just even hearing story and connecting with other people and how they've navigated different changes is really helpful. It gives us like that extra, okay, we can do this. We've got a community. We're not alone.
Absolutely. And I'll add to that, of course, My Care Friends. My Care Friends is an online community that's free for caregivers, patient advocates, but certainly anybody can join and communicate and learn. There's 70 different groups on there. There's news, there's online events. We will be adding a mindfulness section coming up. This is the first time I've mentioned that, but by the time this is released, it will already be out there. So we're really excited about that. And we also have podcasts. We have a podcast called Caregiving Insights, and Katie is soon to launch a new one called Moms Need Oxygen Too. So we're really looking forward to that. She's already recorded her first episode. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm really excited to see that. And we also do programs. So there are 7 programs ranging from women and autoimmune diseases to end of life, the various aspects of that, the grieving process, to a whole Alzheimer's series we are now going to be embarking on, which is going to be very unique. So there's many different resources. As Nicole mentioned, we could go on and on and on and talk about these. And I just want to say, thanks to Jill, thanks to Todd, and certainly to Katie and Nicole. We're just thrilled to be here with everybody. And if you have any questions for any of us, certainly for me or Nicole or Katie, there'll be information posted with this podcast where you can go and contact us, and don't hesitate ever. So thanks, everybody. We really, really appreciate it. And Nicole, Katie, any final words?
Thank you. No, that was a perfect summary, and I'm so glad you shared all the other resources available. It's so important that we can find those and have access. So thank you for sharing and having us today.
Absolutely. I agree. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Take care and be well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Are you looking for another encouraging podcast? Let me introduce you to my friend Elizabeth Miller, the host of the Happy, Healthy Caregiver podcast. She visits with family caregivers and dives into their caregiving and self-care strategies. She also highlights that family caregivers are the experts in caregiving. Beyond the informative conversation, Elizabeth reveals the tried and true resources and practical self-care tips that empower caregivers to prioritize their health and happiness. You can find the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast wherever you download your favorite podcast, or go to her website, www.happyhealthycaregiver.com. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.